our team is responsible for providing our agencies with data, platforms, and strategies for data-driven marketing. And it's really kind of this fun little job that we created about 3 years ago. I'm here to talk about enabling ID strategies. You can really think about this as an evolution of the customer journey, right? As you start to get richer and richer data, you're able to do more and more things with it. Now, some of the pieces I'm going to talk here really aren't specific to Visa, and I'll get into why a little bit later. But I've kept it kind of generic enough to where hopefully most industries can take advantage of it. So this will come as no surprise, but data-driven marketing is evolving. Whether it's regulations, it's our new vendors, if you look at the Lumascapes, everything is changing constantly. But there's really 3 things I would say that kind of are constant and hold true. The first is in terms of kind of this ID strategy type thing, you really need to know your data. You need to know where it lives. You need to know how it breathes. The second piece is really you need to know how to build that ID strategy. The way I kind of think about it is don't let your data die. We've talked a lot about silos. For me, when data goes and kind of sits in a silo, it's kind of dead. So don't let your data die. And then lastly, build a plan for the future. So going back to things are constantly changing, build in features that you may not be able to take advantage of right now, but that you'll be able to take advantage of in the future. So as I mentioned in the intro, Visa is a little bit unique. So we are a global payment technology company. What that really means, though, is we actually don't issue credit cards. So if you think about the way that we operate as a marketing organization, we're really kind of similar to kind of the CPG type brands. We're really kind of a B2B2C type advertiser. People that come to visa.com, our websites, they're not there to sign up for credit cards. They're there to find out about some of our benefits, who's offering the card. So in terms of like online conversions, we don't necessarily have the luxury of using that in all cases, which is why we were created to begin with. And so for ad tech, our role, again, is also helping with measurement, helping with segmentation, helping find ways to automate. Because while we have limited first-party data, there's still a lot of really cool things that we can do with it. The other piece that's really complicated is we're a global team and a global organization. So what that translates into is there's about 5 regions we work with on a weekly basis, but then there's something like 120 different country marketers. And so everything we do, we have to try to find ways to scale. It's really about kind of building frameworks that the markets can take advantage of, because the data in, say, the US is going to be different from the data in Brazil or different than Australia. The other piece, and this goes back to not having kind of that on-site conversion, is how can we enable segmentation across the different proprietary platforms? So we don't have that authentication event. We don't have people logging into our systems in many cases. So the news of Facebook's first-party cookie is actually really exciting because we were trying to find ways to do different things that could allow us to treat and to persist a Facebook ID without having that authentication. Lastly is security. I won't ask Chris to recap our rep how long it took to go through our security process, but it's painful, it's long, but it's the right thing to do. And so one of the things that was surprising was when we first asked Telium for all of their certifications, they actually had to break it down into multiple emails because they couldn't just fit it all. So with all of that said, why am I up here? Well, about 3 years ago, we had a really crazy idea. And it was, with all of these kind of limiting factors, we need a DMP. And the way it really started is, this is from Google Trends. If anybody's used it, it's kind of really interesting. So it shows you kind of the search activity over a year for certain keywords. So this is data management platform. You'll see that this started in about 2009. When you overlay CDP on top of it, this started sometime in 2014. So why is that? And this goes back to the evolution of marketing. So if you think about where we were in 2019 or 2009 and even still today, we were very cookie driven. Everything was about cookies. How do we take our very limited cookie data, tie it to a bunch of third-party data so that we can run our campaigns? Now we have gotten to a place to where we're starting to talk about identity and really seeing the value of first-party data. And so that's where that shift is coming into play. You actually notice more recently that CDP and DMPs are now starting to kind of pace evenly. Going back to third-party data and first-party data, obviously there's a big trend now to shift to more first. This is for a couple of reasons. One, we're able to measure performance better, but I also think when you think about privacy regulations and GDPR, third-party data is going to become much more modeled. It'll be less and less accurate. There's thousands and thousands of third-party data vendors out there, and when you type in a certain keyword, you don't really know what's going to perform better than the next. Thinking about scale, so if we're building an audience strategy for a certain campaign, and we start to include third-party data, what happens when you try to translate that strategy to another market? Because the data providers are different, it doesn't necessarily work. Lastly, the other shift, and this gets into the kind of the meat of the topic, is the concept of shifting from a data strategy to an identity strategy. And this is really critical because when you think about what an ID strategy is this starts getting into the silos, right? And kind of an overly simplified definition of an ID strategy is you have two different data sources, they have different IDs, but you want them to communicate with each other. That's kind of the simplest way to think about your ID strategy. Your goal really is to understand consumer behavior across all environments. So if it's in-store, if it's online, if it's publisher A, publisher B, tactic A, tactic B, having the right ID strategy in place will help get you to that kind of nirvana. And really, how do you tell if your ID strategy is any good? The way I like to think about it is kind of a mindset shift. There's a lot of versus going on. Publisher A versus publisher B. Tactic A versus tactic B. You can think of it like email versus display. Where an ID strategy, what that enables is that enables an and conversation. So it's publisher A and publisher B. Tactic A and tactic B. And where this becomes really interesting and really fun is when you start to bring all that data in-house and you can start to build really advanced models on top of it to find out what different tactics or different media mixes skew or favor different types of consumer segments. And so all of this is really enabled by that identity strategy. Understanding kind of how you can get an ID from one system to another or mapping everything together. Now, across all of this is privacy. Privacy is a massive, massive consideration because you just can't go passing unhashed emails across to everything. So when you think about your identity strategy, also think about how you're going to maintain privacy. For example, Tealium, you can hash things. For us, we're not allowed to hash. We have to hash kind of in our products themselves. So we're not allowed to have Tealium touch any of that stuff. But what we do is we find some certain IDs that we've gotten approval from, and we're able to stitch all of those together. So in terms of how do you actually build this plan? Visa, so for the projects that we work on, there's probably about 5 or 6 different stakeholders. We've got our IT team, we've got security, we've got marketing, we've got my team, and then we actually have a whole nother product IT team. And so there's 5 different stakeholders, not including privacy, who all have input into what we're doing. And it took a while, but we're kind of in a better place now. So what we actually did is we brought in a third party, Analytics Pros, to actually help us manage this process. And it was so easy to have them involved because they helped us actually implement our Google Analytics, and they helped us implement a few other platforms. So we brought them on because they understood Visa, they understood how we operate, but they also could help us drive that strategy. So they helped, I'm gonna introduce Tamara from Analytics Pros. She has managed the project and has been fantastic.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tamara Conley, which is weird for me to say because I just got married, and my last name was Celta before. So when I was registering for this event, I actually put down Tamara Celta, so if you see me with my badge and you see a different name, I'm the same person. So as Adrian mentioned, he brought us in because they really needed help with building their ID strategy. And at Analytics Pros, we have a process we like to put in place for all of our client engagements. I tried to keep this very high level so that it didn't matter what industry you're in, you can apply this to your own ID strategy and implementation. And I also wanted to include some best practices to consider along the way. When Visa came to us, they had a lot of questions, but they didn't really know what those solutions could be. And we brought multiple teams together to ensure the project not only moved forward, but we met our deadlines and it was a successful implementation. So I want to talk about what our strategy process is. Everybody's kind of talked about these things a little bit, but they haven't really gone into how you can do it. So we like to start with what we call a strategic planning session, right? You've probably been to these at some point. We prefer, if we can, do it on site. I know it can be really difficult with many people all over the country. And you have other places you need to be. But if you can get all parties involved, do it. And the reason why is because you get that face-to-face and you can actually share your ideas with each other, with different experts in the field. Maybe you have data scientists in the room, maybe you have marketing analysts, project managers, so on and so on. In that strategic planning session, you should know what your goals are. And if you don't, you should start talking about them. What is this project? What are we trying to solve? Why are we here? Another crucial piece that I feel goes very overlooked is assigning roles and responsibilities. Who is in charge of that particular phase in that implementation process? Who is your data owners? Who's going to tell us what is okay for security? Who's going to say, this is what the website user flow is? You need to know who those people are so that when it comes time to actually execute the project plan, you have no roadblocks because you know who to go to. I also think it's really important to assign a lead per organization. If you have a very large project and you have multiple agencies involved, you want to have one person that you can go to in that group so that you don't bother your devs, you don't bother people who don't need to have 200 emails coming into their inbox. You can be that source of communication for them. After we've had a strategic planning, we like to go and look at what the site's status is right now. In this particular case with Visa, they already had tagging in place and they were migrating to Telium. So they brought us in, since we know a lot about GTM, Google Analytics, that's kind of our wheelhouse, but we partner with Telium on many other projects, and we had done this migration before. And we said, yes, absolutely, we can help you. But let's look and see what are the gaps that you have right now, and is there any existing tagging that's not going to be moved over to Telium? Are there tags that have issues that need to be fixed? Having that list and making sure what you're actually going to bring over is very crucial to dev time, because you don't want to have your devs spending a bunch of time on tags that you're not migrating over, especially if they're problematic and it's going to take a ton of time to fix those. Well, if you're not going to fix them, they're not coming over, save the time. So you've had your strategic planning, you've performed an audit, you know what you're working with right now. This is where your playbook comes into place. This is where your strategy plan starts, and you have a foundation. You have some solutions now from talking with other people who are involved, probably internally as well. And this book, we're kind of known for these playbooks. It's why a lot of our clients like to use us when you're doing a larger project like this, because it really outlines all the business objectives, solutions, issues, and considerations that need to be taken into account along the way. It also outlines the current data flow infrastructure and creates a plan that you can stick to and know that if I need to go to somebody when we get to phase 2, I know who that phase 2 person is. So it can also include, those appointed leads that I was talking about before. Especially when you're talking with so many different parties, it really helps to have that one document that everybody can reference at some point. So I've gone over a process at a very high level. What I want to talk about is some best practices that we have found are crucial to creating a solid plan and ensuring that you have a successful implementation. So I talked about this a little bit before, and other people have talked about this as well. Share your ideas. Get your experts into a room. We had the advantage of being able to talk to Visa's key players when we went on site. We also had Tealium's team there, and they were able to tell us a little bit more about the product and how it could fit into Visa's plan. We could talk about solutions that we have found along the way. And it's also just really good to always have those sessions, because as Adrian was talking about before, our industry is evolving. We're constantly getting new updates about changes in the system. New tools are becoming available to us. So a solution that might be working today isn't the right solution 6 months from now. Adrian touched upon Facebook Pixel offering first-party cookie as an option, right? That's a game changer. That's a game changer for so many of my clients. And these are the kind of things that at Analytics Pros we have to keep on top of so that we know what the right solution is at that given time. Don't be afraid to reach out not only internally with the experts that you have in-house, but maybe you need to hire an outside agency. You might actually find that if you find the right group, you will save money and time in the long run. Network, we're all here together. Many of you I've met before. Use your networking, know who you can reach out to, and make sure that you really find someone who knows your business and has some great solutions for you. So we talked about data layer a bit. Everybody knows about data layer, right? But one thing that I really want to give advice about is make a list of what you think should be in there, and then talk amongst your different organizations and don't just put everything in there. I have so many clients that come to me and they have this 500, this is not an exaggeration, 500 parameters they want in their data layer. You don't have to put everything in there, but you definitely should put things in there to standardize your data in a way that makes sense for you. And if it shouldn't go in the data layer, maybe there's an opportunity to have it as a custom dimension. Use a consistent event model. Again, I've had clients come to me with all these different parameters and events that they want in place where it's different amongst their various sites. The problem with that is you cannot aggregate that data later, right? You can't look at that and actually be able to compare across sites if you don't have a consistent event model in the first place. So with Visa, they actually told us ahead of time, we're actually going to want to eventually make this a global implementation if this is successful here. And we kept that in mind and said, look, if you have 3 different dev teams that you work with, they need to be using all the same model. And it's really hard when you have a big organization, you have many people involved, you need to make sure that that communication is open and you set some standards in place. This is a big piece to this whole ID strategy. So you need to know what your key user identifiers are. So if you don't know what that is, let me start with some that are very common to all of us. User ID, that's going to be your authenticated users, right? Your logged in users. You could also be utilizing Google Client ID. You might be using IDs that are accessible to you in your marketing software. Find out what those IDs are for you and make sure you have a solid list of those so that you can collect them into one solid record. If you basically make them a custom dimension, you can have that single record that will allow you to relate those IDs to each other, and you can cross-reference that data for more complex analysis. So one of the things that we helped alongside with Telium is making that list and making them accessible to AudienceStream, Telium's event store if you're using BigQuery. That way, you know, as I was mentioning before, you can really expand your analysis efforts. We talked about this a little bit as well, integrating your data into marketing platforms. One of the greatest things that I think Telium has above other tag management systems is their diverse portfolio of integrations. If you're not already using AudienceStream or other products that they have beyond IQ, I highly recommend it. Take advantage of them. They have some of the most integrations available, and it really allows you to receive a complete set of actionable offline and online interaction data. This is going to expand your analysis opportunities, and it'll help you gain better insights to your marketing efforts so you can understand what works best to drive further conversions. Last but definitely not least, Adrian talked about this a little bit before. One of the things that they really like about us and that they keep coming back to us is we think about the future if we know what that future looks like. There were a lot of platforms and tools that Visa knew they were going to use. As I mentioned before, they also knew that this was eventually going to be a global implementation. So we took all those things into account when we were creating our strategy plan. And we made sure that we could standardize the implementation just enough that we would simplify the deployment in the future. So our strategy plan accounted for upcoming global releases. And I mean, there's going to be caveats. There's always going to be something that comes along the way that is specific to that region or that site. But if you take the time to standardize the initial efforts, everything else will be so much easier going forward. On behalf of Andrea and myself, thank you guys so much, and I hope to talk to some of you later on.